get the sticks together. Coming. Wait a minute. Long now. I want to talk about the ego diet. Ego diet. This isn't something I read somewhere. It's something I just made up while I was coughing. Ego diet. Diets. What do? Our thinking process certainly isn't on a diet. That's very chubby. That's very muscular. It gets more exercise and to strengthen it, and so that we can think and figure out and judge and condemn and accept and reject and on and on. So, but the idea with our self-centeredness is it gets fueled and gets larger and larger and larger because it feeds on, in Buddhism, what is called the three poisons, or passion, aggression, ignorance. Passion is the grasping. Aggression is pushing. And of course, the strong version of that is to actually kill something or hurt something. Or the grasping one could not necessarily take the form of just passion, loving someone, or grasping at someone, but it could also involve stealing, could involve all kinds of thinking process that justifies things, blaming, praising someone, praising oneself, blaming oneself, praising someone else. Praise and blame are two of the what's called the 8 worldly concerns, or 8 worldly dharmas. Most of the world runs on these 8: pain and pleasure, praise and blame, fame and ill repute or bad reputation. What's the other set?
Gain and loss.
Huh?
Is it gain and loss?
Probably. Or I should say probably. I quite often drop that syllable out of probably. You guys do that? Probably. My mother used to say parbly. I can figure that out. I remember when I was about Ruby's age, which would be 8, I remember thinking, that's just not right for a full-grown adult to mispronounce that word. She didn't mind. I told her about it. She said, oh, I don't think people said whatever back in those days, but she said something equivalent to that. So ego diet, how do you do that? How do you actually take your self-centeredness and stop overfeeding it? So one of the ways, the way to start is to see the way in which you keep fueling that situation, the way we keep adding on to that. As soon as something happens, instead of just letting it be what it is, we add on our comments, our opinions, our ideas, our judgments, which strengthen our self-centered. We're the one who's right. Or you can even do we're the one who's wrong. That also is self-centered or egotistical. So, of course, the way we do that here in this kind of environment and in most Buddhist communities that practice meditation, and in our situation, we sit down and face a wall and watch what comes and goes without grabbing on, without rejecting, without shutting down. Those are the 3. They're hard to see. It's hard to see how those actually work because they have so many different nuances. They're so subtle. We grasp, we want things, we cling to things, pardon me. Or we get upset, we go to war, we fight, we try to destroy things. Or if pulling on things and switching them around and trying to change them, passion, doesn't work, and then trying to push or destroy or get rid of something doesn't work, then we go to the 3rd one, which is quite difficult to see, is we just distract ourselves. We If something is a problem, so it went away. So anyway, if you lost contact with us for a few minutes, you're losing it again. We're losing the signal. I don't know what that has to do with. Do you?
Well, they did say it was gonna have a storm tonight.
All right, that's probably what it is. It's a storm. So Ruby just informed us, weather lady, just informed us of a storm. Would a storm do that? So we apologize. You won't be missing much. I often say forget everything I said anyway. So this idea of a diet, it's a way, just a way of looking at it. It's kind of a device to get you to look at your ego a different way. How would you take your self-centeredness, your own particular version of the way in which you think of yourself as being self-centered or egotistical, or the fancy word is narcissistic? How would you take that and just back out of that a little bit? Well, one of the ways you can do that is come in here and sit down in front of the wall and face the wall, because that's not comfortable. We're not, this particular kind of meditation we do here isn't meant to necessarily make you feel all peaceful and wonderful and at one with everything. I mean, that could happen, take that away from you. But it's what it is about is to sit down and actually see the way your mind works, the way our mind works to gain, the way our mind works to get rid of, and the way our mind works to ignore or distract ourselves. Pardon me. The cold might get the best of me here. So besides sitting in front of the wall, what's sometimes called a voluntary suffering or voluntary discomfort, or why would you even do that? Well, the reason we sometimes are inspired to do that is because every other thing we've tried to be happy hasn't worked. It's a kind of a dead end. We tried this, well, that's not so good. We tried this, well, that's not so good. Things run out of their. We might get bored, or we might get even aggravated, or we might not be as good at something as someone else is. There's just so many varieties of that situation. So, and sometimes someone just for no apparent reason at all is just feeling distressed, or sometimes if we wake up in the morning, we feel very sad or very confused, or intense negative feelings. We don't know what to call it because we can't see where it came from, or who caused it, or what caused it. And so what do we say? What everybody else says. I'm feeling depressed. I feel kind of depressed today, or I've been depressed, or I'm haunted by depression, and so on. And what's being said here is, rather than try to cover that up, which is what modern medicine does, I'm not saying you shouldn't use medications. I'm not against that. I'm just saying, don't necessarily trust anything somebody with credentials says to you. On the other hand, those may be the exact people you need to talk to. So you should decide. And it's interesting, if you take 10 people or a dozen people who all have PhD or MD or all of the other number letters you can have after your name, you might find that someone with no letters at all after their name might be more helpful to you, or be more on your wavelength than all of the credentials and all the certificates on the wall. Or not. There's just no way to know. But one of the things you can take with you is your open-mindedness and your own insight, your own intelligence into any given situation. You should decide. I'm not here to sell you on anything. I'm sure it may seem like it, but I'm not. But I am here to suggest to you, and this may be somewhat of a sales pitch, you do it. You do it. If you can. I always say to people, if you need some help, I'd be happy to help you. But I would need permission. I wouldn't presume to come in and march into your territory and try to correct you, tell you what's good for you, what's bad for you, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. That being said, those people who are close students of mine know that if they come and ask me what they should do, I just may tell them. And they may not like that. But then I'll say, well, I didn't mean that. I thought that was funny. So how do you learn to, I guess the only word is, how do you learn to trust yourself? How can you, any of us in here or anyone who's watching, and hopefully there's somebody out there, I'm sure probably Maria's there.
William Murray is.
William is there, good.
And 7 viewers altogether.
I'll see you on Sunday, William. Coming down from somewhere up north. So the way you develop that ability or that confidence is to sit down and see the way in which you lack confidence, the way in which you're unsure of yourself. You have to actually sit down and see the way you're kind of frightened by certain things about the way you think. Seems necessary to see that. And in that way, then you can actually begin to trust yourself more. When I say trust yourself, I don't mean believe your thoughts. I often say, I always say, I continually say, don't believe your thoughts, which means also don't disbelieve your thoughts, which is a little challenging because we're so used to this or that. We're so used to, it's true, it's not true. And it is possible, I do it every day, to live without any particular knowledge of right or wrong and still be very, very respectful of your environment and of other people and not necessarily live by rules or structures. If you believe something, then you may accept it. I believe this. But another form of belief that is more subtle is I don't believe that, which says that is also means that you should take a position on that if that's not true. So that's a form of belief. Say that something is not true. People say, I often say, what do Buddhists believe? And I say, not much. And I say that not particularly to be funny, although I really realize it's hilarious. But the belief situation is very low level, the low burn, the fundamental situation that we all find ourselves in, being human beings in an apparent 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, if you include time, space. Suddenly we're just popped into here and we're little, we're tiny, and then pretty soon we get to be 8 years old, like Ruby. And then we keep on going, and then some people get to be really old, like. But you'll notice as soon as you come here, as soon as you get here, we immediately start being somewhat indoctrinated by like we should be. It's our society. Our mom and our dad tell us this and tell us that and answer questions, and hopefully, and treat us with respect, hopefully, or not. And all some kind of conditioning that whoever we were before we took on this human form, whatever that was, you could call it spirit, call it any name you want. It's still whatever it is. You can call it anything, but it won't change what it actually is. And that whole situation starts to get modified by causes and conditions. How you're treated, how you react to how you're treated, how other people react to you about the way you react. It's called dependent origination, and it was the basic discovery of the Buddha. What this wooden sculpture represents is a person who lived 2,500 years ago, and through his distress over seeing sickness, aging, and death, wanted to find out why, what is this? What's the cause of all this distress that's going on? Sickness, aging, death, why? So he left his kingdom and went into the what was called the holy life, or the path of the sannyasin or mendicant, which was totally supported by the society in ancient India. You could be a Brahmin. You could put on robes and renounce the world, not even work, and people would donate food and shelter or whatever to support you, because they knew that they were so wrapped up in their daily jobs, they couldn't really do that, but they really respected you if you did that. We don't have that in this society. So, and they still have that in ancient India, or the modern India. Any questions so far? Yes, Sheldon.
So I noticed that you, when you're driving, you stop at stoplights.
Talking to me?
Yeah.
You haven't been around.
And I've also noticed that you wear clothes in public.
You've been keeping track of me.
How is that?
Did you see me
Different.
in my bunny suit?
Not yet, but I keep
See, you haven't been watching me all the time.
How is that different than not necessarily living by any rules?
So what you're picking up on is a rejection of rules, which is, I don't believe in those rules. And what I said is, I neither disbelieve nor do I believe. So it puts this old man in a wonderful position of not having to conform and not having to prove something by not conforming. So therefore, I might as well brag about it since you put me on the spot. I don't have to conform to shit. Sorry, yeah, that's a swear word. But there's no need to follow some kind of rule, including Buddhist rules. There's in Buddhism, when I first asked my second teacher, Kobun Roshi, if I could take the precepts with him. This is in 1990, two or three, four, somewhere in there. He said, you don't take precepts, you observe them. So, and I was quite embarrassed by that, because I felt like I was pretty knowledgeable at that time. So I was embarrassed. But the idea is to observe that, is to not follow it, but to see the way you can't help but take life. That's one of the grave precepts, the first grave precepts: not to kill, not to interrupt the mandala of the present moment is no taking life precept. Not to interrupt the mandala of the present moment. So the mandala, or circle, Sanskrit word for circle, mandala. Not to interrupt that. In other words, whatever's happening, don't disturb it. But then what happens is we see that we can't help but disturb something, or stop something, or start something else, just out of the causes and conditions with which we were born with, and with which we interact with the rest of our world, including the other sentient beings that we're related to, our partners with, our friends with, our enemies with, whatever. All of the things that are rising and falling in terms of dependent origination or relative truth. So what happens is, you find, if you're locked into a law, you become a fundamentalist. In other words, you become tightened down, and you don't see that this is not always so. It's not always that way. There are times when you have to. There's sometimes when, even though this is this is the precept. This doesn't fit in this situation. You have to actually lie, or you may have to kill. Or you may not. You may not go out and kill animals. You deliberately kill them. You may not be able to do that, so you may have to be a vegetarian, or somebody else may have to kill them for you. So, but as far as running red lights or wearing clothes or anything like that, those are just conventions. So I observe those observe those conventions, but I'm not bound by them. So what I do or don't do doesn't reflect on who I fundamentally am. And if you understand what I'm saying, it won't on you either. Most people are wandering around worried about, on some level, worried about what other people think of them. And I'm not saying there isn't some of that here, but there's not much. And how do I know? Through contrast. Because at one time I was there's no way I could sit up here in front of a group of people and talk off the top of my head and be questioned like that. I would be petrified. Those days are no longer here. But that doesn't put me in some kind of I'm so aware and I'm so accomplished and I'm so. It just means that I'm present. That's like I said to people all at college last night. Maybe I said it some other year. I don't know. My memory's just slipping a sprocket. Is most of the time people are living in an imaginary future and an imaginary past. We recreate something that didn't even happen because you can't remember exactly what happened. Memory is just a string of lies. I'm not saying they're lies like deliberate, but they're not true. You can't actually remember what actually occurred. Yes, you can remember that you went to the store, you bought groceries, and you bought 3 loaves of bread, and you brought some milk. Do you have a question? Not Ruby. I know she doesn't. Do you have a question?
No, it's just thinking you're talking.
Okay. I saw you talking to the gentleman there. I thought maybe you had a question. He might have a better answer than you would have. So, yes.
Carol Kayat from Minneapolis has a question.
Oh, good. And don't forget to.
Carol asks, what is the role or purpose of ego? How can it serve us?
How can it serve us?
Serve us.
So the way it begins to function, if you're not attached to your self-centeredness, and you see that the self-centeredness is not real. In other words, it's not like it's false, but it's not like it's true. It's somewhere in between. Then you can see the way other people are totally attached to their identity. So if you hadn't gone through that, if you hadn't understood what your ego and what your self-centeredness was, then it would be much harder to see what's happening with other people's self-centeredness. So, like I sometimes say, if you meditate a lot, you may not feel any better. You may not even feel like you've changed any. But one thing that will start to change for you, more than likely, there's no guarantee, but more than likely, is the very people in your milieu, your everyday life, your family, your friends, your coworkers, and so on. Certain people in those areas that you were very very irritated you, or gave you a hard time, or you'd like to go to war with. Maybe you've managed to resist, but you definitely have to get out of the room because they're just too difficult to be around. Instead of seeing them as possible opponents that you want to fight with, you begin to see, and some of you have heard me say this over and over again, you begin to see the where they're coming from. They're coming out of intense suffering they don't even know they're having, but they don't want to suffer, so they come out and they try to take that confusion, that suffering, and put it out on you or out on the world and blame or attack people. Sometimes it's very subtle. They aren't out and out blaming you, but they're coming after you. They're arguing with what you say when there's no reason for it. And instead of being at war with it and saying, well, I'm out of here, I don't like that guy, or I hate them, or did you hear what he said? Instead of doing that and mixing it up and making it even more warlike, more of a chance of going to war, Instead, you actually begin to extend your awareness into what is actual reality, that this person is suffering and they don't know what to do with their suffering. So compassion begins to arise in you. And if you had not gone through the process of having an ego and seeing that had holes in it, that it's empty, that it's a charade, that it is false, it's like a mask, it's empty. It's empty of what you think it is. It's unreal. Your self-centeredness is not real, and it's broken up into parts. I sometimes say it's discontinuous. We're not saying that your mad self and your happy self, whatever they may be, or any other self that comes up, we're not saying that those are unreal from the point of view that you can get rid of them. You can get rid of something that's real. I mean, get rid of something that's solid in here. You can get rid of that. But you can't get rid of something that is an illusion. You can only see that it's illusory. And it may hang around, it may not. But if you see what it actually is, you won't care. Isn't that great what I just said? Huh? Well, it's really powerful. You begin to see it's heartbreaking to see that somebody that you had always been at war with, like I was with my stepdad. And then to begin to see that, oh my, I never noticed. It's like, I never noticed how much they were suffering. But he's gone now, so I can't tell him that I see it now. It's called compassion. It doesn't belong to anybody. It isn't like, I think I'll be compassionate. That's called arrogance. You can't be compassionate. You can only see the suffering in the world and not separate yourself from it. So I think it's time to, well, I'll do yours, Shoga, first, and then I'll do Maria Bardowska. Go ahead. I'll do yours.
How is being kind to someone helpful?
Because it's kindness, because you're being kind.
I think about the interview room in the interview with you earlier and talking about trying to help someone with their self-centeredness.
Yes.
Rather than trying to help them, just be kind with them.
Just be kind. Always be kind. If you meet someone who you see as self-centered, be kind. I'm not saying kiss their butt. If they do that, and if they get really difficult, leave. Say, see ya. But don't fight. Don't point out something that they already know. Have you noticed if someone is self-centered or arrogant or whatever, and you pointed out something, they already know that. That's why they fight you. It's like they want to say, shut up. I don't want to look at that. Or they'll say something like, don't you think that I know that? Sorry. It's not that funny, I know. Reminds me of something else. So, go ahead.
It seems like sometimes there's so much difficulty arising
Yeah,
that
there is.
I can't help but feel like taking that person out.
Yeah.
How can I be kind?
So just you're a meditator. You're sewing a robe. You're going to be a monk one of these days, hopefully in the near future. You sit and face the wall. You do that every day. So what was your question?
How can I be kind in the midst
So,
of
well, you're already kind. Just keep doing that. Just don't be mean. It's actually, I'm being very specific. I'm saying when you feel the grouchiness or the meanness or the antagonism or the blaming arise, don't do anything with that, including criticize yourself. You're not going to win. It's a war you can't win, because it's a war with yourself. You can't win it. You can't win any kind of war. All war is with yourself. Why? Because if you go to war with somebody else, you're going to war with your idea of them. Because if you really saw who they were, it'd break your heart. You know what I'm talking about. If you saw what is happening with that person, you wouldn't go to war. We go to war with our projections. It's called duality. Dvaita is the Sanskrit. There's a practice called advaita, which means non-duality, seeing that it's not two. You can't find two things anywhere. This is the realization or the understanding or the insight of the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, who saw, after 6 years of practicing meditation, saw that everywhere he looked, he didn't see anything separate from anything else. So therefore, he saw that he was not separate from anything else. And then he realized that he had awakened. And when he realized he had awakened, he saw that everyone was awakened. They just don't know it. So the way you help someone awaken is you don't go to war with them. Be kind. If there comes a time when you are starting to function as someone's personal teacher, then you may, through skillful means, or upaya, as the fancy words say, which isn't a plan, it's not a strategy, but you may spontaneously interact with a person to expedite their karma in such a way that they may realize quicker their non-separation or their enlightenment. But you can't do that by choice. If I treat somebody which might look like disrespect or being unkind to someone, it won't be because I'm choosing that. I don't really choose anything. And anyone who's a teacher is all through choosing. No more chooser. That's limited. That's ego mind. That's the one we were talking about, putting on a diet. Put it on a diet. Don't feed it. One of the ways you can do that is come in, sit down, face the wall, have all the senses open, observe what continues to move. What it continues to move is the ego. Until it doesn't. That may be 20 years, maybe 50 years. Maybe you'll never realize it in this lifetime. Go ahead.
More questions?
Certainly. Don't let me forget Maria's.
There's a question from William Murray, and then
Yes.
Shane has two other friends with him watching tonight.
Good.
One of them has a
I
question.
hope this doesn't turn them into enemies.
I think they're friends. But first, from William Murray, if one observes the ego through meditation, how does the ego fade? For instance, you mentioned anxiety of what others think. How does the observation dissolve that anxiety?
It won't matter if the anxiety goes away or not. If you're trying to get rid of anxiety, it's circular. You'll get rid of it a little bit and then it'll come back. You'll get rid of it and then it'll come back. Circular. It's like you might be getting on a tilt-a-whirl. Nauseating. It's just circular because it's relative truth. So you might get rid of it for a while, but then it'll change in such a way that it'll come up and bite you in the butt again. And it's just circular. But if the self-centeredness is no longer real nor unreal, then there's no one to get hooked. Then if you feel anxious, you just feel anxious. If you feel self-conscious, you just feel self-conscious. The fundamental thing is the self-consciousness or the anxiety is all by itself. It doesn't have a partner, which is an ego. It doesn't have someone there that actually feels that feeling and reifies it through constant stories about, oh my God, I can't feel this way. Why did they say that to me? Why did they do that? Or I have so much anxiety. And the way we train to do that in this tradition is to sit down, look at the wall, and train ourselves to see very clearly who we are. Get to know yourself. Make friends, as my teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, once said, make friends with yourself on a deep level. So there's no more enemy anywhere. Not here, not out there, nowhere. I'm not saying there's not conflict or difficulty, or even some sparks and gunshots and so on and so forth. But it's all within the realm of this this incredible space we find ourselves in. And that's why we take, in our tradition, as monks or lay practitioners, we receive vows or observe vows to save all beings, or meet everything right where it's at. More from William.
Just how does the observation of that dissolve the ego?
So,
But I think you've answered that.
well, it doesn't dissolve the ego. You don't have to dissolve something that's not real. It's like, God, I had a nightmare last night. I got to dissolve that. No, you don't. It's a nightmare. We'll say, well, yeah, but what if it comes back? Have you ever had a nightmare twice? Well, I know Jay's on has, but he's special. We have a special practice for double nightmares.
And then from Shane's friend Hannah,
Yes.
she wants to know what the precepts are.
So they're a series. Shane has a copy of those. You can read them. But there's the three refuge vows: refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha is an example of someone who is sane. There's nothing to worship here. There's no deity happening here, nor is there not a deity. Again, wearing clothes or not wearing clothes, no different. But if you're in a society where people wear clothes, you wear clothes. If people are stopping at those red things hanging above the street, stop. Unless you want a blue thing to come in, put a hole in you. That was funny. Who thought that up? So, refuge in the Buddha, refuge in the Dharma is the truth that he taught. Refuge in the Sangha, the community of monks or practitioners or students that are trying to understand what the Buddha taught. And hopefully by someone who understands what the Buddha taught, so that he or she can present that to you and discuss that with you and answer your questions. And if they can't, they better get off this chair. And I sometimes say to my students, don't get up and teach unless you have to. So, not trying to make make people teach other people necessarily, unless I tell you to teach, and then you have to. And then there's the three precepts: do good, very simple; don't do harm, and be with all things. In other words, stop fighting with everything. In order to stop fighting with your own thought patterns, you have to first realize you're having constant thought patterns. And some you like, some you don't like. So some you really want to keep around because they're very pleasant and enjoyable. And some you want to destroy or get rid of or take out because they're unpleasant. And what's being said is just observe. Whatever's arising, just observe. Just look at it. Don't fight with it. Be with all things. And then there's the 10 grave precepts, which are basically about killing and stealing and lying and all those other fancy things. But they're not rules to be followed. They're something to be observed, to see the way in which you can't help but lie. We lie all the time. Anyone else, or should I go with? So Maria Bardowska, who's in Toronto, says, could you say more? She's not able to text in. Can you say more about, I said something about sometimes the expression is no man's land. In other words, no reference point. So, and she's saying, could you say more about no men and no women's land from the last Sunday that I talked about that? What did I say about it then? Anybody remember? I don't remember.
Was it about the desert?
Huh?
I remembered you mentioned about the desert being no man or no woman's land
Yeah.
for meditation.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah. All right. Will you be my secretary? So the idea is no man's land or no woman's land. Nobody's land. It's like looking into your mind eventually after all the claptrap and the cartoons and all the crazy mind patterns and animation and so on start to settle down. Eventually you see a very open dimension, and it's nobody's. It doesn't belong to anyone. And it is without a particular reference point. So it's like no man's land. It's open and spacious, and it could be said to be a little bit lonely. So, but that loneliness stays there as long as there's some kind of self-centeredness still hanging on here. Then there's loneliness. But when the self-centeredness has been seen through, then that loneliness turns into what has been called aloneness. You're just alone. If you're not separate from anything, then you always have company all the time. And at the same time, you're completely. So is that where the heart abides? Of course it's where the heart abides. There isn't anywhere the heart doesn't abide, but as long as we're relative beings, we have to find that heart. It's like what I was saying, to sit down and begin to slowly begin to stop going to war with yourself through seeing the constant warfare that's going on, of fighting with your thoughts, fighting with your emotions. If you're having negative emotions and you come and say, well, I'm having negative emotions, well, it depends on how much you meditated and how close of a student you are to me. But I might say, good. That's good you're having negative emotions. It's about time. You've been running around acting all happy. How do you think other people are feeling? Looking at Sensu, because she has a completely expressionless face. No one will ever read Sensu's mind, because it's what? Hidden, okay. Hidden is good. Empty, hidden, that's the same. So feeling for, emotion for may come and go, but the fundamental compassion isn't necessarily an emotion. It isn't like, oh, I feel so much compassion, because any emotion, if you start to ride the wave of an emotion as being something you're trying to crank up, it will fade. The kind of compassion we're talking about here is a sense of openness, more like a no man's land or no woman's land. It's more like a complete openness that is available and ready for anything. If you live in that land, then anything that comes riding into your territory, you accept. Take care of them. So I'd like to respond to your inquiry is be kind. If you're living in that kind of a space, then whatever is happening in front of you is it is your opportunity to help them. And one of the ways you can help them is be kind. And how does that translate? Might be difficult for them, because they might be so used to going to war with themselves. They might have been taught that they're a terrible person, will never be worth anything. And even though they're still acting terrible, they're trying to prove out, well, I'm terrible, but I'm just going to be terrible. Usually that's reserved for 8-year-olds. But there's a lot of adults doing the same thing. And we all do that a little bit, depending on our clarity or lack of clarity. So when you're kind to somebody who's been giving themselves a hard time, they don't know quite what to do with that. Sometimes they'll get worse with you. They'll get mad at you. How dare you be kind to me? Can't you see how horrible I am? So by doing that, you actually model being kind. You're kind to them no matter what. And so then how are they gonna work with that? Depends. Everything is dependently arisen. They may take it as if you're insincere, then they may take it as that being insincere, that you don't really mean it. More.
What is sincerity?
The lack of bullshit.
How do you know if you're bullshitting?
You'll know. I'll tell you.
When you say,
Bullshit is being kind of puffed up about yourself. Even if it's right, even if you've got all the attorneys are all on your side, a little puffed up. But sincerity is wherever sincerity just finds its own level. It's sincere. Water is sincere. It always seeks its own level. If it's up in the air, it just goes down to its lowest level. Your mind can do the same thing. When the mind has transcended the self, or the mind has the benefits of being on a diet, then mind is very skinny and can go into any crevice or any crack or any area, just find its own level, sincere. Okay, Maria, I hope I covered your questions well. No other questions? No other questions here? Yes.
I just kind of feel like sincerity. See, I'm kind of sick. It's cold weather up here in Michigan. Sincerity, I feel like it's just pure. It's just natural power, energy within here. It starts here. You can feel that. You tell the person true sincerity. I mean, I can for myself, which is kind of cool.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay.
The very last page of the Chant books has the dedication of merit on it. We also have a donation box outside in the hallway. If you could help us, we would appreciate it.
Fill it up with marbles. Golden marbles.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san shi shi son mu sa mo ko sa mo ko ja. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita,